This is part 2 of 3 talks on Demeter and Persephone. This one won't be highly inspiring because I'm going to be taking very down-to-earth things this time. So quite a bit of it historical. And because my body is ill. It's kind of hard to be inspirational when you're ill. Well, alright. Next time we will talk about the really deep stuff. We'll talk about a Platonistic interpretation, and then we'll be on that, hopefully. We'll retell the story since it's been so long, and since Pam has been copping out for a long time. Demeter, whose name means barley mother. In Roman, she's known as Ceres, from the word ceremony and cereal. She's the daughter of Kronos and Rhea, and she is the sister to Hestia, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. She is a goddess that has much to do with both heaven and earth, and can be seen having a really strong identification with both. And she has dual natures in both. For the most part, she's a really kindly, gentle kind of soul, and is a divine benefactress. On the other hand, she's also quite lusty. She copulates with her brother Zeus and has 2 children, Cor and Aeacus. Cor, I believe, means innocence or something like that. And Aeacus means boisterous shout. She also has other bed partners, some because she wants and some because she doesn't. She has a big affair with Iasus in a rain-soaked cornfield, a thrice-plowed rain-soaked cornfield, and comes back to the wedding all full of all full of mud. Zeus gets jealous and he kills Aeacus with a lightning bolt. And the result of this union is Plutus, which is not Pluto, but wealth. Plutus means wealth. And during her period of sorrow, she has, how would you say it, a transmorphic sexual relationship with her brother Hades. Because she tried to hide from him by becoming a mare, and he became a stallion, and they had 2 children as a result. 2 foals, I guess you call them. 1 foal and 1 colt. That's the way it would be. But at any rate, she has a lot to do with bellies. She was in Kronos' belly, and she's caused somebody to eat and never get full and such like that. She has a lot of things to do with the belly. We talked about that last time. Though she's very mild, she's had a lot of sorrow. In the heart of the mystery myth, remember this is the second of the 3 mystery myths we're going to look at. Next time we're going to look at part 1 of the last mystery myth, which will be Dionysus, Zagreus, Bacchus, Liber Bacchus, all as one being. And then the following time we're going to see the priest of that being Orpheus, which is probably the most, for me, important myth that we're going to cover. And in this case, when we looked at Isis and Osiris, it was a wife grieving for her lost husband, and in this case we have the much more severe case of a mother grieving for her daughter. Her daughter, Cor, which means pure maiden, later is called Persephone. But in the interlude between being called Cor and Persephone, she is out one day with her maiden friends on the fields of Eleusis, and she's picking flowers. Some say poppies, some say daffodils, and Hades falls in love with her. Better said, he falls in lust with her, and he goes to Zeus and says, I love your daughter, can I marry her? And Zeus gave a George Bush kind of answer, knowing that either way he would be in trouble, either with Demeter or with Hades. And he said, I can neither deny nor grant your wish. And Zeus, Hades takes that as a go sign, and he comes out with his black horses and black chariot, and Hope comes out of a cleft in the earth and grabs Kor and takes her down into Tartarus. And the only person who has any evidence at all is Hecate, who hears the words, a rape, a rape. Demeter is adamant, as only a grieving mother can be adamant. She goes through 9 days of tremendous grief, and has all sorts of episodes in those 9 days. She refuses to return to heaven and refuses to let the world come to life. It's becoming desolate. Every living thing is dying. She wanders everywhere looking for her daughter. She eventually she has this nasty affair with Poseidon as a horse. And she eventually comes to the court of King Celeus in Mantinea, and still being with milk from having given birth to foal and colt, she is hired as a wet nurse to the new prince Demophoon. And while there, the lame daughter of King Celeus tries to cheer her up by singing her dirty ditties. And then there's an old nurse who tries to go one better and first plays a joke on her and gives her a drink of water with barley and mint in it. And finally she starts groaning, the old hag, and she lifts up her skirt, and there she has her pubes shaved, and it distracts Demeter, and she laughs, and out from under her skirt jumps Aeacus, her son, who grabs her in her arms and kisses her. And while she's drinking, one of the king's sons, Abba, says, "My, how greedily you drink." And she gives him one stare, and he turns into a lizard and runs off. And she feels ashamed of having done that to her host's son, so she decides to take Demophoon and immortalize him by putting him into fire, holding him in the fire. But while she's doing that, Demophoon's sister Mantinea comes in, and I think she's making noise of some kind, and breaks the spell, and Demophoon dies. And King Celeus is now grieving as much as Demeter is. But Demeter says, "I will give you more recompense than you can imagine. You still have 3 sons remaining." And about this time, the 3 sons, one is Triptolemus, the cattle herd, one is Eumolpus, the shepherd, and the Eubuleus is the swineherd. And they're all out with their animals when the ground opens up, and a black helmeted man whose face they cannot see comes charging out of the ground and grabs a young woman and goes back into the ground, and the pigs fall into the crevice in the earth. The princess wept for the young girl, and Demeter now has evidence. She has a witness, and she takes Hecate, and they go to see Helios, the divinity of the sun, who sees all and knows all, because he's up there all the time, and he verifies this and says, "Yes, what you're saying is true." So she pleads her case to Zeus and says, "Everything's going to die on earth unless I get my daughter back." And so first Zeus tries bravery, and he sends Iris down. And Iris has all sorts of gifts, and Demeter says, "No go, I want my daughter and that only." Finally, he sends Mercury down to Hades because Hermes is the only one of the Greek gods who can go into the underworld and be friendly with Hades. Mercury and Pluto have a special relationship with each other astrologically also, but that's neither here nor there. And he says, if you don't let Kor go, we will all be undone. He sends Hermes also to Demeter saying, your daughter is yours provided she doesn't eat any of the food of Tartarus. And Kor had been so distraught while in Tartarus that she didn't even eat one slice of bread. And she's leaving and being carried off in a chariot when smarty pants Asclepius, who is a gardener in the garden of Tartarus, said, I saw her pick a pomegranate and split it open and eat 7 seeds, and I'm ready to bear witness. Demeter is both joyful and grief-stricken because she's getting her daughter back, but she knows that she's also going to lose her. And so there is a struggle of wills again between Hades and Demeter. And finally, if things are taken to grandmother Rhea, Zeus can't handle it himself. And what happens is Rhea comes up with a compromise that 3 months she will be the bride of Hades and the queen of Tartarus and be known as Persephone, which means bringer of doom or something like that. And 9 months she will live above the earth, and she will be known as Kor. And Hecate volunteers to watch over the pact and see that it's done. Before leaving Elysius, she gives all kinds of gifts and curses. Asclepius, she puts in a hole in something like a manhole with a stone over the top of it. Later on, Heracles frees him from this, but Demeter immediately turns him into a short-eared owl, which was one of the ugliest things that the Greeks could think of. Cephissus, who was somebody who consoled her and aided her while she was on her search for her daughter, Demeter gives him the fig tree and its cultivation, which has to do with fruitfulness. The fig is both fruit and flower at the same time, botanically speaking. And the whole house of Celia, she gives to Phanetius, she gives the art of cultivating grains and gives him all of the grains that will be cultivated, but warns him never to cultivate beans. All the mystery schools had something against beans. We won't even go into it because there are about 5 or 6 different interpretations. They're all interesting, from the ancient to the modern. And she promises to the house of Celius that forever they will celebrate and be instructed into the mysteries of her worship. Triptolemus especially is given a cart that is drawn by serpents, and he is taught the art of agriculture. He becomes king of the mysteries. And according to the Platonists, the art of agriculture was the sowing of souls into the earth, meaning to say how the soul gets embodied into the earth. All right, now we're going to look at some very almost secular things just to get the feel of things, and then the next time that we meet, we're going to see some of the deeper spiritual sides of it. Last time we looked at the myth, and we had all sorts of little sidelights about all of those details. And when we told the story, we did about the same thing that we did with the story of Isis and Osiris, and saw those as key figures in the mystery myths. But what we did with the Isis and Osiris is we interpreted the myths from several vantage points on one horizontal plane. We interpret them physiologically, we interpret them astronomically, by star lore. This time what we're going to try to do is we are going to look at the myth not horizontally with various different spiritual interpretations, but we are going to do it vertically. We are going to look at the myth at 4 different levels of depth. But before we do that, we want to look at the celebrations of the mysteries. There were 2 celebrations of the mysteries. There were the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. Almost nothing, if you're not clairvoyant, almost nothing is known about those mysteries, because it was punishable by death to tell about the mysteries. Even the skeptics and even very gross people all admitted that whoever passed through the mysteries was transformed into being a better human being. And no one passed through the mysteries without having some sort of vision of the spiritual worlds. But for some people it was quite common. So we're talking about something, a process, a dramatic process that is awakening to spiritual consciousness. We've talked for a number of times now about the nature of the mysteries. Now, when we talk about the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries, it's peculiar because the greater mysteries actually existed before the lesser mysteries did. And when you hear about the greater mysteries are not what we call in a modern sense the greater mysteries. But we'll talk some more about that next time. These are the Greek lesser and greater. The reason the lesser mysteries were started was for Heracles. Heracles was on his 12th labor, and his 12th labor was to go down into the underworld, into Tartarus, and get the watchdog, which was called Kerberos. I think it was a 2 or 3-headed dog, and he was to bring it up to the earth and kill it, which was right up the alley of Demeter after Hades had taken her daughter and abducted her and taken her away. And on the way to find the adit, or the opening into the earth, the cleft into the earth, he passed the releases. And he asked to be initiated into the mysteries. And technically this was disallowed for 2 reasons. Number 1, he was not an Athenian. And the prejudice that the Greeks had was not a prejudice by color, it was a prejudice by language. And if somebody didn't speak exactly the same language as they did, they were considered barbarians, even though they were Greeks. And so the Greeks said only, this belonged to a race religion. Each of the different tongues of Greece, the different tribes of Greece, had their own mysteries. They were all their own hierarchies of gods, and they were all parallel to each other. But people were born into certain races to hear certain language and to wear certain clothes and have a certain type of diet, because that's what they needed for their specific kind of experience. And the prejudice was there to make sure that there was not at that time too much intermingling of races, because those races needed to be kept as pure vehicles for getting specific kinds of experience. All of that is now outdated. It's very much changed. But so he wasn't an Athenian, meaning he wasn't an Ionian. And he could not then be initiated. And the second reason he couldn't be initiated is that only people of very high character could be initiated into the mysteries. And he had the blood of the centaurs on his hands. And so he couldn't do that. And Demeter fixed something up for him. She said, all right, we'll find a way that you can get into it. And the first thing that was done was Palias, who was a curious man in himself. It means of the gate, meaning the gatekeeper. Peleus adopted him as his son, and then he became an Athenian. Peleus is very interesting because he's the precursor of Parsifal, because he had the same sort of experience of seeing somebody with a wound of many years, and when seeing the person with the wound, he feels the pain, and later he gets the healing ability to heal the wound. The second thing is that in order to purify his character, the lesser mysteries were formed. And that's the history of them. They were celebrated in a different time and a different place. The lesser mysteries were called Myka. And they were celebrated in February, at about our time of Lent. Yes. Right. Yes. And so he could qualify to view the greater mysteries. That it's a very peculiar thing. The greater mysteries, everybody became a seer to some degree, even if it was only momentary. And one viewed the mysteries, which is a very unusual word that they use. It has to do with seeing. In fact, the lesser mysteries have to do with seeing also. They were celebrated in February, and they were celebrated across town from Elysius in another little town called Agris. Agri. A-G-R-A-E. And they were celebrated next to the river. And if we remember the river from Isis and Osiris, that's the river Oceanus, that when you go upstream, you become a god, and when you go downstream, you become a human. It's the caduceus of Mercury stream, involutionary and evolutionary. The lesser mysteries were completely choric, meaning to say that they dwelt on the principle of purity and lost innocence. And the purpose was a cleansing remembrance. They were called the celebration of the miseries of the soul. And they were called telete, in that they lopped things off. And what they lopped off was your sins, or some of your tendencies to sins, but the sins for certain. And once cleansed, you couldn't go back to your old way, because telete, as much as lopping off, this goes back to, remember the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, where they cut all the limbs off of the tree? That is called the process of telete, which is a cleaving off, but it is also a process of closing or clothing over. Because when a person passed, the people who passed through the lesser mysteries were called myste, meaning veiled. Yes. They were a celebration of the miseries of the soul. They were the purgation of the pain and of the faults or of the failures that produced the pain. And this is where our word mysticism comes from, our word mystery. It actually means to be veiled. And as a consequence, everyone coming out of the Myka were called veiled ones. And they were in the same position as Isis. Remember, Isis was completely veiled. You went through the mysteries of Isis before you got to the mysteries of Osiris. And the veiling has to do with not only being cleansed, but recognizing you're being cut off from the spiritual world. And they were mysteries of vision. And there are very few auditory illusions, but there are many optical illusions. And the whole optical world was considered illusory. And the veiling is the veiling of the universal spirit, the world soul, by matter. And the painful, sorrowful, grievous recognition of our being veiled was the lesson of the Mikah. So that when you went through the lesser mysteries, you couldn't go back to your own way of life, and you were then a Mista. And after 1 year, after having gone through the lesser mysteries, you were then allowed, if you had passed your probation and had lived a life that was consonant with your original cleansing, that then you were allowed to enter into the greater mysteries. The lesser mysteries had to do with sight, and the greater mysteries had to do with sound, with the reception of the word, the greater joys of the soul. In the Christian sense, they relate to St. Luke's Gospel and St. John's Gospel, because right away in the very beginning of St. Luke's Gospel, it's very clear that the writer says, "We who have seen these things." Whereas right in the very beginning of St. John's Gospel, it talks about we who are hearers of the word. Those are not poetic statements. Those are actually mystery keys. That seeing is much more associated with feeling. Sound is much more associated with thinking. And if you look in Luke's Gospel, everything, like the spikenard of ointment and all of those things are tremendously feelingful. Whereas if you read St. John's Gospel, the lofty philosophy and the deeper ideas, it's the most profound of all the Gospels. The people who received the word were not called miste, they were called ipapte, which has many meaning. They were apoteri, seers. There's also a seership that comes from this, but it's seership in the higher sense. The greater mysteries were celebrated on the plain of Eleusis. This is where Kor was abducted by Hades, and this is where she was released into the upper world. They were celebrated not in February, but they were celebrated in September, probably very near to the equinox at a right phase of the moon. Some say it was a celebration, and some say it was an entheastic orgy, which is probably the proper term. You're going to hear a lot of Platonistic terms, especially next week. It'll be the Platonists, of all of the people that I've ever heard interpret myths. The Platonists, people like Proclus and Clement of Alexandria, and Lucullus and Sallust, and people like that, they were great mythological interpreters. The best I've ever run into. I can read some of the things. Sometimes you have to read a line 5 or 6 times to understand what they're actually saying, and then to understand what it means. It's really profound. The next week we'll try as much as we can with our limited consciousness to enter into that. An entheastic orgy means that they were captivated by a god. Not in mediumship. They had a science called theurgy, which is okay in the mysteries. But in order to be involved in theurgy, according to the Platonists, and it's even hinted at in the modern, like Rosicrucian mysteries, in order to learn things that go beyond the divine spirit, that go into the deeper cosmic planes, you have to leave several of your bodies. You have to be like out of your mind in the highest sense of the word, and then you catch an updraft in the consciousness of a divinity, and that is called theurgy. And in that experience, you recognize things from the deeper cosmic planes. And that was called an entheastic orgy. Of course, not everybody that was celebrating the mysteries at Eleusis was having this kind of experience. because some of them were very down-to-earth people. But this is the beautiful thing, that people would go through the mysteries, and Plato, who was a very noble and pure man and who studied the higher discipline of philosophy, could be standing right next to Alcibiades, who was gay and liked to drink. And they both could be having a spiritual experience about the same thing, but at different levels at the same time. It's sort of like, everything that has to do with the mysteries is multi-level. This is why some people, like the simple-minded Jesus people, can read the Bible and they can be benefited by it in almost like it's a children's book. But yet you can read it on another level. As deep as you can go, it's with you. And you can go back to it, and you can successively go through it. And the celebration of the mysteries was just like that. You were going through it. So everybody benefited from it. Everybody had an uplifting experiences in it, but not everybody was allowed to go into the adytum, which was the Holy of Holies, or the Sanctum Sanctorium. I like adytum better. The Romans are all right. I just filled in a sweepstakes. British Airways is having a sweepstakes that 1,600 lucky people all over the world can send in as many entries as they want, but they're very careful that you dare cross one dot or put one dot in the wrong place. And then they have this independent company who's doing a drawing, and you can choose one of, you put down first, second, and third choices of where you would like to go if you win. But you have to be able to go on the 23rd of April. And the April Fool is the drawing. And I, of course, said my first choice was Bombay, because that was one of the British Airways gateways. And for my second choice, I took Athens. And so maybe I could go see now. It's all temples now. It's not celebrated on the plane anymore. Third place, I took Bangkok. Just I'll probably not get it, but it would be interesting. So there were a number of people who conducted the ceremony. Ceremony meaning celebration of Ceres, the Roman version of Demeter. Because the Romans actually got into the mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries later on. We'll give their names by order of importance. The highest person in celebrating the mysteries was called the Hierophant. And the Hierophant was called the interpreter, and in which word the preter is important, because preter is the same thing as Petra or Peter. The keys of the kingdom are in the hands of Peter, and the Petra, interpreter, means he who reads the stone tablets. All of the laws, spiritual and material, in every culture, the Jews weren't the first. All of the laws, spiritual and material, were written into stone, but they were written in a rather cryptic way, and the only person who could read and run was called the interpreter. And so this is actually what it means when Paul says in the Bible, if you're speaking in tongues when you have a real experience of the Holy Spirit, it doesn't mean anything unless you have an interpreter. And the modern Pentecostals think this means that that's another person that tells you what it means that's also having that experience. It can be so, but the interpreter means that there is somebody in charge of the whole thing and understands the meaning behind the words. The interpreter, no one knows the names of the hierophants. We hear about Aristotle and Plato and all of those great and noble people. We hear people like the man that we were quoting so much, Plutarch, as being associated with the mysteries. But the hierophants were unknown people. He was called the agriculturist. He was the husband of souls, and he was the great sower and reaper. And like the ancient priests of India, he carried a curved wand, which was like the blade that is a plow. And it was thrice daring Triptolemus who was the first interpreter. But in the times of Plato and such, the Hierophant was a full-time priest. He was celibate, and he was a very high, holy, ascetic nature. A profound man. And you don't hear about these people in history. They're usually more behind the scenes. They've had their days of joy, their days of glory. Next to the Hierophant was the torchbearer. When the words are interpreted and brought to light, that was the torchbearer, the bringer of light. Then the words were reinterpreted at another level as the crier. We're going to talk about him just a little bit. And then there was a minister at the altar. All of the Freemasons would be very interested in all of this. And then somewhere down in there, just to satisfy the material world, there was a basileus. I think that's how it's spelled. No. There's Basilius. Obviously, you see, I'm not much interested in words. And the Basilius was the king. And later on, the Hierophant and the Basilius were opposites to each other. They each ruled part of the year. That the spiritual king ruled one part of the year, and the Tanist, or the material king, or the Basilius, ruled another part of the year. Then there were 4 curators who were called caretakers of souls. And then there were 10 offerers of sacrifice. And those were the people that conducted the mysteries. And there might be hundreds of people in the celebration. Now, according to the Platonists, they were celebrated over 9 days. We're going to go into quite a bit of this next time. And they were celebrated in 9 days in 5 stages. And the first stage, or lowest stage, was the stage of arithmetic. I don't know, I'm terrible at spelling. I'll probably never learn it. Geometry. Stereometry. Stereometry is what we call solid geometry. It's from the same word as our word stereophonic sound. It comes from deep in the spiritual worlds, even before the beginning of our solar system. Somewhere along the line before the Titans, the Fates were produced, the 3 Grey Sisters, and there were 300 handed ones, Briares and company, and there were 3 Cyclops. And the Cyclops had one eye that they could see all around. No, I want to stop just a second. I got trouble with vandals in the neighborhood. Okay, I think we're all back again. People all over the world. Do you know that these tapes go to Europe and Asia? Yeah. Interesting, huh? Only one going to each place. And music finally, astronomy. All of these things to study in the Platonistic and Pythagorean mystery schools, you had to practice all of them in this order. And these 5 segments were purification, sacrifice, let's see, Hoptia, reception of light, and investment in revelation, yes. This part is the meditation part. These are, you're all supposed to meditate on these. Like arithmetic is the actual counting of what is there and what isn't there. Geometry is putting things on a two-dimensional plane, and that has to do with the telete, the cutting things down to a two-dimensional world, and there's sacrifice in that. There's a spiritual side behind all of these, and no, you're supposed to meditate on them. I'm meditating on them. I don't have these. I only get so much out of it. I can't get it all. I can't say them all. And finally, the last one is friendship. And communion. Which friendship and communion is such that you are having friendship and communion with the gods, not just other humans. So that's, you wouldn't even say just other humans, because when you once experience that, it would all be all the same. So at the stage of purification, there was a washing, and one took things off. At this point, the crier said yea or nay. Did you make it or did you not make it? So from the time that you went through the lesser mysteries, had you lived to your probation? Because the crier was far enough. The crier acts as the conscience. All of these beings are people that are inside of ourselves. That the formation of of those who direct the mysteries is like a formation of something that takes place inside of ourselves. And the crier, as conscience, can look into the soul deeply enough to know whether this soul is ready for receiving the mysteries, viewing the mysteries. Because if one is not ready and applies too soon, it is a very deadly, dangerous thing. I had one friend that demanded initiation at too early of a time at a much different mystery school than I know of, or than I participate in, and a person ended up with a fear that would never go away, that in the middle of July was heaped under every blanket in the house with her parents hugging her to keep her warm. She was in constant shiver for fear of the monster that was going to come through the wall at any moment. And she got her initiation, and she realized that all of us are communicating with each other on different levels at the same time. And it was more than she could bear, because in many cases there was a lot of hypocrisy going on. She couldn't stand either the terror or the joy, and she eventually made a living will and sat in a parking lot behind St. Mary's Hospital and blew her brains out with a pistol because she couldn't bear it. It was too hard. The only thing that would have saved her would have been a simple, down-to-earth, very human kind of love, but that just wasn't immediately available. Okay. So the stereometry had then to do with the receiving of light by being able, I'll give you a little more of that as far as I can go with it. The stereometry had to do with penetrating to the realms of light. The investment in revelation had to do with the building building and stepping into the soul vehicle. And the inner communion with God is pretty well, like if with astrology, when you're looking at the horoscope, it's the horoscope of God at the same time as it's a horoscope of an individual. And astronomy, astrology, when you are communing with the gods in that manner, that's the kind of friendship and communion that you have. And that's why that was the highest of the 5 disciplines in the Orphic types of mystery schools. Okay, the Eleusinian mysteries were celebrated over 9 days. The word mysteries means to initiate. And it also means to close one's mouth. That one who was initiated had a silence, and it wasn't just to protect something or to be exclusive. It was a reverential silence that you couldn't possibly ever verbalize those things. There are just some things that words, as we know words, are insufficient. And if someone else is capable of receiving that information by a direct transmission, then words are no longer necessary. They are also initiates. And the word mysteries also means to become a magician. The number 9 represents the current human condition. It means 3 times 3, and it's approaching the decad, which is the complete 3 times 3, a threefold body, a threefold soul, and a threefold spirit. The decad is when they are all united together through one singular threefold mind. It's a everything is accomplished ultimately. Like, my sin extends off into the distance. I'm never far from it. That's what karma is like. It's like a line that stretches and beads together all sorts of things. The whole process of beading. That's why blind people have to string beads. It's not because that's the only thing they can do and that it's a degradatory thing, but that they see the connection between one common spirit putting together different bead-like experiences and going through that again and again throughout their entire life. They recognize the destiny that they had that brought them to that state. That wasn't intended to be in the talk, but it's fun anyway. Because there's no fun for me, there's not going to be any fun for you. 9 then represents the as far as you can go as a human. It represents a complete human. 6, instead of being 3, 3, 3, if it's 6, 6, 6, that is a threefold body together with a threefold soul, but no threefold spirit. So you've got a monster running around with no in-guiding spiritual intelligence. So 333 or 3 times 3 is a much different thing than 666. In all mysteries, ancient and modern, even though there may only be 7 schools or 7 rays, the lesser initiations always go through 9 steps. And now we're going to go through the 9 days of the mysteries and sort of tie them together. I should have expanded this. Oh, gee whiz. The first day was called Agormos, Agurmos, which meant conclave. This is when the people came together from the countryside. They came together and were united and probably received some sort of exhortation that put them in the spirit. But it's the same as a synod is now, or the word conclave, that they come and draw together and are as one. Yeah. The second day is called A Lady Miste. I should write these all down. It took a long, to even dig these things up, it took a lot of work. And on the second day, usually there was everybody went down to the ocean. And there was a purification. Oh, I should put these the other way around. Because we're talking about the purification. Because we can do it later on. We'll get to see it next time again too. Only a much different way next time. Everybody went to the ocean and went through a cleansing rite in the ocean. In fact, there was a cry to the sea. And some claim that in the same way that in the mystery myth, that when Persephone, when Clor was taken into the underworld before she was Persephone, and Ebulius's swine fell down into the, there was some people feel that there was a sacrifice of at least one swine at this day of the, I don't know if it was symbolic or whether it was actually a physical sacrifice. Now I want to talk about something, we're going to talk about it a lot next time, as much as we'll have time for. And that is that the symbols of all of the mysteries are built into the Christian Gospels, which are representative of mystery myths themselves. Each of the four Gospels is itself a mystery myth, and all of the symbols and all of the activities of the ancient mysteries of all different cultures are built into the Christian Gospels. So like in St. Luke's Gospels, when there is a man that is filled with devils and they're cast out and they go into a herd of swine and they charge down to the sea, that is representative. We're going to talk about the meaning of that sort of a thing next time, the Platonistic meaning, which applies perfectly well to the Christian mysteries as well. The third day was called sacrifice, or in tears. Like the second day was to the sea, the third day was called in tears. I'm sorry, I don't have the Greek name for it. And on the third day, they were given barley and mullet. Very much like in the Christian mysteries, people were fed with fishes and loaves. Mullet being a small sea fish, and barley being the grain of the intellect. What? Two words, in tears. Because in the sacrifice, it was a very tearful sacrifice. It is related to the stage of Persephone. Actually, when people were living through the myth, they were actually undergoing the tears that Demeter went when she was going all over the earth looking for her daughter. It is sort of the loss of virgin, pure innocence, and you realize that you've lost it when it's been replaced with something else, something gross and sensual and sinful. And in the quality of sacrifice, or in the telete, when you cut these things off from yourself, there's a great purgation that takes place, and it's very tearful. Unless, Demeter could never have heard the dirty jokes if she hadn't first cried. Each is a different way of, coming to revelation. And the sorrow has to come before the comedy, because the comedy, we could get into really deep Platonism with this. They had one of the highest of all of their arts. They had 9 levels of development, and they related them to different spiritual planes and things like that. And they had it with the 9 different muses, and which were the birth, which had to do with the proper use of the senses. The Platonists were very wise in that they saw an improper versus a proper use of the senses. One, you got all sensualistically involved in it and lost the spiritual meaning of it, and in the other, you used them to their full capacity, and they were associated with the different uses and different levels of memory in remembering the spiritual worlds. It's much different than it was in that little, in the Meno, when Socrates gives that loaded argument, which proves that this guy remembers from the past life, and that's what education is, it's a much different meaning than that. Okay, we're getting too far into too many sides of things. The fourth day was called the Grand Procession. And it was a weaving kind of procession, very much like the, what were the strophe and antistrophe? When they performed the dramas, they had these choruses that would sing, and one would go forward, one would go clockwise, while the other was going counterclockwise, and they would sing choruses, strophes, and antistrophes. And sacred baskets were carried by women, and these baskets themselves were woven. And they had that spiral woven type of effect to them. And people carried rice, carried chests. And in the chests were various things. The seeds that were given, most notably among them was the sesame. Everybody was shown the chest of sesame, which goes back to the Babylonian mysteries, because in the Babylonian mysteries, the power of the word was shown to the disciples by taking them out into the sesame fields just before full ripening, and the Hierophant knew how to make a hyper sound at the back of his throat that could split open the sesame pods. And it had to do with the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves open sesame, where you open into the internal mountain, the high place of invisible consciousness, and you get into the inside. Sesame was also the Mid-Eastern and Eastern European version of rice, because it was subjective and it grew part of its time underwater and part of the time above water. They were also shown chests full of carded wool, which we'll talk about in a later myth. They were shown chests full of salt, chests full of pomegranates, the seeds that brought Persephone back into generation, and they were a red food. And until I started studying this Platonism, I never understood why I had such a prejudice against things like beets and pomegranates and cranberries and things like that, because the Platonists were forbidden to eat foods that were pure red. An apple would be all right because that's just red on the skin, but something that's red through and through. But I don't want to go into that because that's a much too long of a side trip. I'm just giving you all sorts of things here so that you can meditate on it and such like that. And they were shown poppies, and they were made made cakes with poppy seed in them, barley cakes with poppy seed, which is where our poppy seed cake to this day that we eat when we eat poppy seed cake and poppy seed bread that goes all the way back to the celebration of the Eleusinian Mysteries probably 4,000 years ago. And the last thing in the procession that I know of was the people carried thyrissae, or each one carried a thyrissus, which was a staff. And at the top, instead of just having one ball, it was covered with grapes. And instead of having serpents on it, it was wound with ivy, the Saturnian herb that has to do with history, seeing evolution as a history. The fifth day was the day of torches. And everyone carried torches, and it had something to do, from what I know of, though nobody tells you exactly because nobody knows exactly, and I won't know until I get clairvoyant and be able to see for myself, but this was the day that they were put through their catechism. And it was a catechism to see whether they it was like the Hermetic dialogue. You had to be able to speak the truth. I don't know how to say it any other way. You had to be taught certain things, or you had to know that you knew the secret doctrine, which wasn't something, it was taught in books, but the real meaning of it was written in the book of life, in the book of the heart itself, that you could speak out the truth of the cosmos, and that allowed you to pass on to the next stage. And on the day 6, all sorts of things went on. This is the day of the first stage of comedy. There was the removal from sin, in that everybody beat brazen kettles as they marched along, and they had carried statues of IHs. Now it isn't idolatry, but they have the notion, they believed, very much like the anthroposophists believe now, that there's a different art for each of the spiritual worlds, and that the art for the physical world is architecture, and the art for the etheric world is sculpture, because it shows how life works into form and into matter. And they believe that having statues, that showed how the spiritual forces, how the gods worked into forms and into matter. So they carried statues of IHs around. And they did a lot of ecstatic dancing. It was something like Sufism, because they're reaching the higher levels now. And they carried around fig trees, or fig blossoms, because fig is both a flower and a fruit at the same time, and it bears its seeds openly like the pomegranate does, only it doesn't have to split to open. It stays, the front of the flower is always open. In fact, there's even inside of every Kalmirna fig anyway that there's a wasp, otherwise it would never become a fig. So therefore, if you're eating fig Newtons, just pick one apart one time and look around, and there you'll find wasps. Because there's no other way you can have Kalmirna figs without having wasps die in them. And it takes too much to pick them out for fig Newtons in the department of... I just changed some dietary patterns right there. I don't know about the other kinds of... about the fig Newtons that you get in health food stores or anything like that. I just go for the straight figs. And then everybody passed through the portal of initiation, which was a gate, something like the Champs-Élysées. And it had to do with passing through the straight and narrow, or passing through the eye of the needle. And after you've done the catechism, then you have to live it out. And then there was a crossing of a bridge between two worlds, the outer worlds and the inner worlds, between the microcosm and macrocosm. And there was, everything became comedy after that. And it was then sort of a mystical entrance. On the seventh day, there were games and contests for barley. I don't know what the spiritual meaning of this is. I don't know whether the common folk were distracted by the games while the others got some special insight, or whether it had something to do with the world being the football of the divinities and they all compete to manifest into it. I don't know. The eighth day was dedicated to healing work, because no one came out of the mysteries. The really spiritual part of it, it was called the Day of Esculapius. And in that day of Esculapius, there was not only teaching of spiritual mysteries, but people were taught to be healers. You could not come out of this, where our PhD comes from. It comes from a doctor of philosophy, like from Plato's Academy, was an attempt to have a school of the mysteries, almost like you could walk in and pay your tuition. And to be a PhD meant that you were a doctor, meaning that you could heal. Also on day 7 was when the sacred marriage was performed, and there were special spiritual dramas that were performed. This was day 8. And then at day 9, the last day was the day of sacred vision. And some of the physical visions is they were shown 2 baskets. The eastern basket was in the shape of a cone, and it had the fruits of the earth in it, sort of like the cornucopia that we see, the amalthea. The other basket, it wasn't actually a basket, they were actually bowls. And we're going to talk a lot about those next time. and the other basket was perfectly spherical in shape. And they were also shown in the west basket, in the west bowl, the spherical one, the contents were a serpent, an egg, and a phallus. Though some writers claim that there was a phallus and a yoni. I won't. This was the day that everybody had their actual baptism in tears, and everybody drank the mixture of barley and mint, and everybody had revelations. All right. That's as much as we know, or at least as much as I know from digging through quite a few sources about the public celebration of the mysteries. Now we're going to do something altogether different. We're going to start looking at our 4 interpretations of the myth of Demeter and Persephone on different levels. Sallust, the philosopher, says of myths that among the ancient Greek philosophers there were 4 different ways that they were interpreted. One was material. 2, animastic. 3, physical. 4, theological. The material interpretation of the myth had to do with only the outer material world. And it was just a very simple little allegory. The animastic had to do with how individual souls psychologically work into matter. We're not going to do an animastic interpretation until we get to Orpheus. And the physical showed how the gods brought the spiritual forces into the material world. And the theological interpretation was strictly about the interactions of different gods and goddesses, meaning various spiritual principal beings as principles, as they interacted with each other in the higher creative work. Sallust also goes on to say that only the mystery schools used all of the 4 interpretations. And in their celebrations and in their teaching sessions, everything that they did, they took into account all 4 levels at the same time, and people saw them in a parallelistic state. So that's a little bit about the way the ancients looked at mythology. Let's give 2 quick interpretations. We're almost done, about 10 minutes, and we'll be finished. See, I'm getting them under 90 minutes because Karen, she loses that very innocent little smile when I get long, and she gets cranky. She says, I want to sleep. And that's that. This can be taken simply as a nature myth. We're looking at this on the material level. Nature can be looked at as Demeter. It is innocent and fertile, and it is copiously prolific. It unites with the light or bright wisdom, Zeus. Zeus means all bright. So nature, Demeter, unites with Zeus, and from this is born the products of nature. And since this is a divine union, the products are innocent. No one could ever say that a tree or an animal is a sinful, errant kind of being. So the manifestations of life, especially in the plant kingdom, are represented by core. And if it were up to Demeter would constantly be copulating and producing flower and fruit and flower and fruit, and it would continue on that way. But that's not the way it works in nature. The way it works in nature is a force inside of the earth draws down the sap into the ground. That is the Hadean force. And it acts complicitly with Zeus, because the sun withdraws, and it becomes weaker, and the days become shorter. And so then the life in the fruits of nature core are taken into the underworld. There is an attempt to resurrect this in Harvest Home and in Saturnalia, but still it is winter fruitlessness. But nature persists, and it wants to live, and nothing ever has conquered nature yet. Its will to live is as adamant as we see Demeter, and so eventually the sun comes around, and Hades is forced to release its grip, and then life comes back into the products of nature are again full. These seeds from core, when the leaves fell off, when the flowers passed away, when the fruit rotted, it left seeds behind, and as core went into the underworld, Persephone was born, and there was death and desolation. Then in the winter snows, and especially the spring rains, the tears of Demeter moisten the seeds, and everything springs back to life, and the cycle is repeated again and again. For people who just need to be in touch with nature, with the material world, this was and is a valid interpretation for the myth. Some people, myself included, I can remember when I never thought about the days getting longer and shorter other than to complain that it got cold in winter and I didn't like it when it was cold. Now I can tell day to day, even when the curve is very flat, you can see from day to day that the days are getting longer again, or that they're getting shorter again. And one needs to be in touch with the reality that one is living in. And so the first level of interpretation is the material. All right, let's skip the animistic, and go to the physical level. The physical level relates to how the gods, how the divine forces work into the material world. The gods' interaction with the world. From a spiritual point of view, it isn't an abrupt difference between the physical world and the inner worlds. There is a quasi-state that is part of the material world and part of the spiritual worlds. This state is called the etheric realm. It belongs to both worlds. It belongs to the material in that it's subject to gravity and velocity and all of the things that have to do with the material world, the grossness of it. But the etheric realm also has to do with the quick, the lively, the vital, subtle spiritual worlds. And so it is a step between the more rare spiritual worlds and the gross physical world. Extrovertively, they bring the love of the gods or of God is light and energy, like from the sun again. But also there's an invisible sun, and there are streams of life energy that come streaming down, especially at this time of the year, that even when the sun isn't shining, you can see them coming down like etheric rains. Huge investments of etheric vitality into the world. So everything that lives, it takes the material world, that we're again talking about like the statues of Iachus, it takes the material world and instead of letting it be hard and brittle and crystalline, crystals are pretty, but they shatter, they don't bend, whereas the forms of life that are invested with the ethers are lively and they're subtle. Subtle. They supple. All right, I'll finally get to the word. You know what I was trying to get to all along. And this is what they do in the extrovertive way. In the introvertive way, the ethers take all of the experiences of the external world and as impressions bring them back into the spiritual worlds as perfume or as soul food for the gods. They are a medium of exchange between the more directive spiritual worlds and the more resistive and or passive material world, so that things pass from without in and from within out. Now, they're not dead abstract forces. The ethers are alive. They can be seen, they can be experienced just like we experience water. And anything that lives has an intelligence in it. And so there are grand beings within the ethers and small ones. Some of them cover whole mountainsides, like a hamadryad. The Greeks used to have clairvoyance yet. They saw Nereids under the water, which were something like mermaids, and they saw dryads overcovering trees or overcovering thickets, and hamadryads covering whole parts of the mountainside. And there are various classes of angelic beings that take the realm of the ethers and have their bodies in it. And they even have, like the same way we have cells within our general physical body, they have small elemental consciousness as cells within their bodies, which we call fairies and gnomes and things like that. So this is a very lively kind of realm. Remember, we're talking about how the gods work into the material. And all of this is live. But in the material world, one of the dangers of the material world is that it's arithmetic and geometric. You think you can go off on a tangent. And we look at life as a linear passage from birth to death. Whereas with the etheric realms, it's much different. It's cyclical. There are cycles of manifestation and of withdrawal. Everything macrocosmically, in our own etheric bodies, because we each have our own etheric bodies, there are waves of cycles, such that if you wake up in the morning and you're tired, sometimes if you are up for just a little while and then take a tiny nap, and then wake up again, you're on a new stage of the cycle, and you're not tired anymore. You know what I'm trying to say? The same thing with overtiredness. You get tired until you're cranky, until you get past it, and you catch another wave of the cycle, and you're like overtired happy. So everything works cyclically. Now, there are rhythmic processes. Some of these last from a fraction of a second, and some of them last for millions of years. But there is one example that is most common, and it's manifest every day, Every day there is an activity, an outward activity when the sun is up and everything grows and does its work. And then when the sun withdraws, nature goes to sleep. This is why there are nocturnal animals. Because when nature goes to sleep, the active energy of the ethers turns inward, and then the essences leave and they go up into the heavens. They're very aromatic. They're like the perfume. And this is what the gods are fed off of. This is why animals who can't see, but they smell instead, they eat at night because they can smell the foliage that they want to eat. Well, inside of that odor is like the impressions that happen on that landscape during the day. But instead of like we see our day backwards by retrospection, or it happens when we fall asleep, whether we know it or not, we see our whole day backwards in a flash of a second. Better if we can do it slowly and see it self-consciously. But when nature lets go, all of the essences come out of the plants, and the angels retrospect the countryside, and with the release of the energy. And so there are these parallels that take place on the diurnal cycle. But there is also a cycle where annually, it isn't what causes the sap to rise. You can vary it with temperature, but you can't force it with temperature. What causes the sap to rise is the cycle. Like in the northern hemisphere right now, the ethers are bulging out, whereas in the southern hemisphere, they are withdrawing and things are becoming desolate, and they're closing together and forming new seeds in the dryness. And this is called the Persephone cycle. Demeter can be seen as the etheric world. Persephone is that manifest, you might say, that ball of light that first comes out into the world in summer and then gradually withdraws, and the world is then in fear and in trembling, and people, when they turn inward, because the etheric energy is inward, they think about all of the things they didn't do right, because you got cabin fever, you got to do something like that. And you do your inward imaginatory work, and you have your tears, like the tears of Tolete. And this cycle then of core being the summer part of the manifestation and Persephone being the winter part of the manifestation shows exactly how the work of the gods is infused into the very resistant and hardened material world. And how the effects of that, because the material world is final. Because when it's carried out, it's a complete objectified thing. It's the end. And then from the experiences of these events, the objects of these events, then the history of it can be taken back in. And that's called the Persephone cycle. And those are the first two of the interpretations. We'll do a theological and a paralogical interpretation the next time. But I think we should go out singing. Does everybody know this is a spring song? I don't know the words. I only know the last line. Da 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 da. Persephone is back again. Da 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 da. Persephone is back again. So you put a microphone on me and I'll become a ham.